Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy September 28th, 2020. The upcoming election brings with it something like a whirlwind, a maelstrom of news, events, crises, what I would generally refer to as abnormalities. To begin with, everything the news has seen fit to exploit has been in the service of, if not rendering the president abnormal, then to paint his voters and supporters as abnormal. Who is the curious Trump voter, asked the main news outlets right after the election 4 years ago. How were they missed? Who knew they could exist? Did we not do everything in our power to steer people away from voting for him? Do they not know he's a charlatan, a racist, a sexist? After the election, as one CNN commentator put it, the vote for Trump was a white lash. One MSNBC anchor said it was the living reality of a waking nightmare. And it was this way every day for the past 4 years. Impeachment was called for within a month of his swearing in, and the calls were unremitting. Scandal was alleged every day for the past 4 years. Stories were ginned up about his appointees, be they assaulters in high school or agents of Russia. Tax fraud was alleged way back then. It has not let up, and it's alleged anew now. Nothing could be normal because nothing could be seen as normal. As if taking a page from Clausewitz, the media was just the continuation of politics by other means, which itself is war to the left by other means. Meanwhile, why cover the creation of the Space Force, a new branch of the military? Why cover Middle East peace deals, plural? Why cover the lowest unemployment in 50 years? Why cover record low unemployment for women and minorities? And if a master terrorist is killed, ignore it. If another master terrorist is killed, make it look like a bad idea that, rather than taking a terrorist off the battlefield, would lead to more terrorism, even war. If confronting one of the great militaristic and human rights violators of our time in the same country, ignore that, but of course pour praise on those who do business with and in that country to the extent they will agree to protest the current president, he being the abnormal one again. Remember? Everything in media coverage of the president has been made to show him and his supporters as abnormal. If he denounces white supremacists, gin up a narrative that he praised them. If his opponents sound like a racist, excuse or ignore it. If his opponent cannot campaign and take regular questions, excuse or ignore that. If riots take place, call them peaceful. If riots take place, label the federal force, because of the current president's status as the president, label them stormtroopers. Stormtroopers, because Nazi. Have the Speaker of the House call the president his party offering only a Sophie's choice in a deal about a tax and relief package, because Nazi. Have the Democratic nominee compare the president to Joseph Goebbels, because Nazi. And have the media make no issue of any of that. And in the media, do not ask the president regular questions about what the people might want to know. Make sure every question is an attempt at embarrassing him. He cannot be normalized. And his supporters cannot be given normative rights of speech or press, lest their message seem normal, justifiable, a corrective, or attractive to others. This is politics, folks, like I've never seen it before. When you step back and observe it and think about the past 4 years, it truly dawns we've never seen anything like this before. And yet, in a lot of somewheres in this great country of ours, we know that no matter the bombulations and racket, there are people who remain deaf and impervious and blind to these efforts. They are the actual normal ones. They know they are not crazy. They know they're not racist. They know they're not reactionary. They know things like killing terrorists is a good thing. They know that unemployment is a good thing. They know that peace is a good thing. They know that patriotism is not something to be ashamed of because they know America is not something to be ashamed of. They know riots are not normal or even okay. They know they are not responsible for slavery or other people's racism. They look, I'm guessing, as I looked, at a story featured on CBS this morning about a new Barbie doll and scratch their heads. It was the Yara Shahidi vote doll, and they ask first, who is Yara Shahidi? If they decide to Google it, they find out, oh, an actress whose political fame is or was about defending Jussie Smollett, even after it was evident Smollett was engaged in a hoax. That hoax was in the service of exacerbating racial tensions that, of course, included an exacerbation using the president's supporters as false or fake aggressors. They look at a CBS story this morning on a new Barbie doll in Yara Yashidi's image, and they ask how it's been marketed to encourage people to vote. And they, the normal, ask a couple of questions, I'm guessing. Questions I asked. First, who is Yara Shahidi? Then learning, perhaps, wait, why are children's toys or dolls like Barbie dolls being used to encourage adult activity like voting? Then, of course, you come to your senses and realize, oh, wait, this is a culture where adults do Halloween now more than children, as children's things are now meant for adults. As we have adult things made for children, it infantilizes the adults and, of course, disappears normal childhood, like everything you might read in Teen Vogue. Or I can give you child sexploitation on Netflix. And you realize maybe another thing. Maybe this whole effort to make the normal abnormal and the abnormal normal is a distortion and wrong. Maybe I'm not the crazy one after all, and they are. We have expressions like the inmates have taken over the asylum. We have those expressions because they stand for something. They are expressions for a reason, as if it's happened before or that it can happen. We can relate to it. The phrase comes from an old Edgar Allen Poe story, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather. In an asylum, one Monsieur Maillard was a patient in the asylum, and he led a rebellion where the patients took over, and Maillard was seen as the new administrator with the previous staff as patients. At one point, perhaps one may call this a tell, Maillard tells the curious visitor to, quote, believe nothing that you hear and only half of what you see. The soothing system, the old system as Poe called it, was upended for tarring and feathering, with the sick in charge of the well being tarred and feathered, the sick doing the tarring and feathering. After the original staff rebels, order is again restored in the asylum. Of course, you have to know that such stories and such phrases have purchase, are attractive, appealing, because there are actual examples of it happening, perhaps not as graphic as the fictional, but maybe, in a way, more so. The imagery here, like the misuse of psychiatry generally, has been used for a lot of political purposes. The notion that you're crazy for what you believe, for what you believe. You're crazy for what you believe. That kind of phrase trips easily off our tongues these days, doesn't it? But in too many socialist regimes, it was literal. It was a condition in the Soviet Union known as philosophical intoxication. And you were asylumed for having errant political beliefs, beliefs that dissented from the state's dogma. It shocked us so much here that when a major magazine in 1964 published a cover issue claiming over 1,000 psychiatrists claim Barry Goldwater is unfit to be president, a Goldwater rule was proclaimed in the profession of psychiatry. Nobody can be diagnosed without being personally examined. And yet, here we are again. There's actually a book of essays by so-called mental health professionals edited and put together by a Yale psychiatrist. Do you know it? It actually has a very Edgar Allen Poe title, quote, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, close quote. Its contributors are all MDs and PhDs. In the effort to cast us and our president as abnormal, there is no bottom. And when you try to convert decency and good into indecency and bad, there's no bottom either. You have a society soothing itself, say on racial matters, where, say, more and more people are integrating and getting past the notion that the color of one's skin matters. And then you one day wake up to realize, of a sudden, the dominant intellectual and sociological narrative is called critical race theory, based on the notion that race does matter, and more than we ever thought. It defines everything. You are in the Poe asylum. You have to be if you disagree and want the older, soothing idea where integration was the goal and race didn't determine things. You are now in a place where the normal are tarred and feathered. You feel a little tarred and feathered lately? First and foremost, remember, tarring and feathering is a method of shaming. Now think about something most of us, once upon a time, thought beautiful. A beautiful thing, a reverent thing, a generous thing, a sign of generosity, help, and an effort at integrationist, colorblind normalcy. Let's say adopting children from Haiti. For years, decades, we've been asked to help such countries. So a successful husband and wife with several children of their own adopt and give the possibly greatest gift to two Haitian orphans by adopting them as their own and giving them a life in America. Beautiful, we would have said. But wait, it's only noble when the likes of Hollywood actors do it. And certainly you are to forget that if the person in the news is a nominee to the Supreme Court by this president. I give you Professor Kendi. You've heard me quote him a bunch recently. Professor at Boston University, leader of the critical race theory movement, recipient of $10 million from Jack Dorsey. Articulator of the sentence, quote, "To be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist," close quote. But here's what he tweeted over the weekend. Quote, "Some white colonizers adopted black children. They civilized these savage children in the superior ways of white people while using them as props in their lifelong pictures of denial, while cutting the biological parents of these children out of the picture of humanity." Close quote. I can think of almost no greater effort to convert the holy into the profane. As my friend John Gabriel put it, boy, this anti-racism stuff is beginning to sound an awful lot like racism. It may be worth noting Boston University, where Kendi professes, is the same school Martin Luther King Jr. received his Ph.D., his doctorate. Wonder what the man who famously said, quote, "I have a dream that one day little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers." I wonder what he would say of such profanity emanating from his old school. Perhaps he would invoke Ezekiel. Martin Luther King Jr. liked to cite Ezekiel and used Ezekiel to teach integration. But perhaps in cases like this, he'd cite a different passage in Ezekiel than he was used to. Perhaps the passage in chapter 22, denouncing the high priests who do not distinguish between the holy and profane, those who do violence by profaning the holy. But to understand these critical distinctions requires us to live in normal times, and for the vast majority of us to be normal, that is to say, immune from the science of our modern-day Dr. Tars and Professor Feathers. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.